Hello, everybody, and those on the recording. I'm Meredith. We're going to get started with the presentation today on storytelling, which is one of my favorite topics. So I'm excited to present this today. I do want to say, just for the folks that are live, you can ask any questions in the chat. Feel free to engage in that way. We don't have kind of a live interactive part, but the chat is the best way to interact. But in the meantime, I'll get started. So as I said, I'm Meredith. My story is that I worked at Facebook for over 7 years, and that's relevant, obviously, to this audience because a lot of you are interested in the FANG, or is it Mang companies now. And I was in a variety of roles. I really worked kind of across the organization on all different kinds of products, mostly in product marketing, product type roles. So I bring a lot of that experience into this presentation, into my coaching. I left Meta now about 1.5 years ago, and I've been a full-time coach since then, working with hundreds of clients to help them in their sort of leadership journey, in getting the career of their dreams, that sort of thing. And then also, of course, interview and job search coaching. So I'm going to talk more about the interview coaching today, but I do a variety of coaching types in my job. One thing that I'm really passionate about is helping people with career changes and figuring out what they want to do next. So if that's an area of interest to you, I'd love to work with you, and of course, interview prep. So the reality with storytelling is it's been around since the beginning of humanity. We've been telling stories forever, and it is one of the most compelling things for stimulating the human brain. We get excited when somebody tells us a story from start to end. It helps people visualize and really think about what you're saying when you bring it to life through a strong story. And I think to that point, it helps you stick out and helps people remember and understand you. And so why I am so excited about this topic and why I get excited in working with clients around it is this is your chance to stand out. This is your chance to differentiate yourself from how a lot of interviews go, which is it feels a little bit like rote or formulaic. And we're going to talk about a little bit about what you can do to stand out from others who might be taking a more formulaic approach. Ideally, where you'll land with your interview prep process is 5 really good stories that can be applied to so many different types of questions. So I know a lot of people say 5, that's not a lot, but you'd be surprised if you have a rich enough story that can be leveraged in most interview questions. So we'll go through what that looks like today, and how you can get started right away making your own stories. Okay, let's get started. So we know what the kind of typical formula is for interviews these days, which is the STAR format. And it's a beautiful sort of formula to start with. And we'll work off of it to make it, again, like a little bit more engaging, a little bit more exciting. The way I like to look at the STAR format is when we talk about situation. In good storytelling, the equivalent of that is we're setting the scene. We're creating the picture of the situation at hand so people can understand sort of the predicament we're in or the challenge we're about to embark on. In the task, we're explaining our role, what it is that we as the main player in the story, what we are about, who we are. And then in the action phase, it's kind of that excitement, like, okay, well, what's happening in this story? Where is it going? Who's involved? Why is it happening this way? And a lot of you comes through, obviously, in the actions as well, because that's where you start to share and kind of how you show up in the workplace. And then the results are kind of a combination of the typical results, but you want to have that nice conclusion to it. So I'll talk about ways to combine more quant and qual results in that kind of engaging format. And then I also think a key piece that would allow you to stand out in the results phase is talking about learnings. And I'll go through in some details around that, but I like to start with STAR and then build off of it. Okay, so first and foremost, in any given story, we want to know who our hero is. And at the context of an interview story, I know this might be hard for some people to digest because it involves like ego and all of that, but you are the hero in the story. I mean, that's the whole point. You're coming into an interview to share something that you did and to sort of compel the interviewer to see that you can do the job. So you're the hero, take that in, hopefully you can. And so ultimately, what we want to do with the starting point of storytelling is to figure out who you are. People want to work with somebody that they kind of get, that they can imagine themselves working side by side in a meeting or on a project. And so it's important for you to know who you are and who that person is that shows up at the meeting to tell a proper story and get across to the interviewer. I think for a lot of people, this can be really tough. So I, as a coach, I try to get you excited about who you are because sometimes it can be difficult to lean into that. But it is possible, obviously, to do it on your own, to recognize the impact that you've had and the type of leader, the type of individual contributor that you are on your own. This is really, I'm a marketer by background. Like I said, I did a lot of marketing at Meta. This is really kind of the positioning, your positioning, like your tell me about you would fit into the hero space as well, but it should show up and be weaved into all of your stories. So ways for you to get in touch with who you are and find those themes that can be woven. A couple of things. One, what do your bosses, what have they said about you in the past? What do your coworkers say? You know, when you look back at maybe all the formal and informal feedback that you've received, what are the themes? Where do you shine? More importantly than where you maybe have some room for growth, where do you shine? Although the growth piece can also be a piece that you weave into stories through the learnings and through, you know, greatest weakness is a common question that people ask, but really focusing on the strengths. How do you show up day to day at work? So that's one way to start getting in touch with who you are as the hero. Another way is to look at your values. Values can be a really amazing window into what's important to you and how you live your life. So ultimately, this is a little harder to digest. It's not just looking at all your feedback from your different stakeholders across time. This requires some self-reflection. And one way that can be really useful and helpful for you to embark on this is to take a look at maybe the last month at work. What were the things that you were most proud of? Where did you find yourself gravitating towards? This is sort of different from the feedback, really just kind of going inwards. And then if you look at that set of things you're proud of, what values are associated with that? For example, somebody might be really proud of how they navigated a tricky cross-functional project and they were able to keep everybody on board, really boost morale, make people feel heard, these sorts of things. Well, then I imagine a value around that for you could be kind of connection or community or something in the people space. Maybe you're an innovator, like that's what you're proud of. And you look back and you think about a really amazing new idea you came up with. Well, maybe that's something around adventure, innovation, which isn't listed here, but learning, something in that bucket. So take a little bit of a look inwards and think about what those values are that are driving you. All right, next are your interests and hobbies. I love encouraging people to think about incorporating this into your interview. If nothing else, it can make it an interesting, end to your tell me about you. Right? Like I had a client who was a director of plays, and they realized that that was where they learned a lot of their leadership skills. And so they incorporated that into their tell me about you, and if it was relevant, into their stories themselves. So what are the things that you do outside of work or even within work that make you unique, make you different? Also, it can be an amazing way to connect with an interviewer, right? Because if they have the same interest, it's just an instant bonding point. So ultimately, where we want to get to with the hero component is a marketing one-liner. Ideally, you kind of have a sense for, this is who I am. And I know this is hard, so bear with me. We'll go through it step by step. One of the kind of classic marketing one-liners is, I help customers do results by doing a solution. So it's a classic pitch. It's really hard to get that simple. And so you can try it at multiple versions of it. Maybe you have different components of it depending on what you're working on, but step by step. So the 4 is a description of who the customer is. And the customer could be internal clients or internal people. You could be mostly serving, let's say you're in human resources, you're mostly serving the employees. But think about what your role, who it is for, both internally and externally. Then the who is a short description of the problem. So again, we'll go back. For I help customers, so that's the who, do results. And you want to better understand who your customers are. That will help you figure out what the results are. So who is the short description of the problem? My is the short description of the solution. So this is what you do to serve those customers. And then what is this in service of? So the value that's created for your customers. I'll give you an example that might be helpful. For me as a coach, I am serving motivated professionals who want more from their careers. So that's their need. I do this through self-advocacy centered coaching. So helping clients advocate for what they want, whether it's a job, a promotion, new scope, or just, basically showing up as a leader so that they can live intentional, empowered lives. So this is my marketing one-liner kind of in a nutshell. I coach professionals to advocate for what they want in their careers so that they can live intentional, empowered lives. So what's your version of this? It should feel natural. Like when I read this, I feel connected to it. I think I could say it to a room full of people. This is something that feels right for me. I could even imagine saying it in an interview. Could it be better? Could my one-liner be better? Yeah, always. And that's the beauty of this, is it's kind of iterative. You'll learn, you'll grow, you'll evolve as a human, and what you are doing will evolve as a part of it. As you get more data, you'll start to evolve. And I think this can be a really powerful first step in anchoring your hero elements. It also can be really helpful for you it's kind of like a North Star or a mission statement. So it helps you think about how to guide your life too. I mean, that's saying a lot for a marketing one-liner, but it really can. You can anchor the choices you're making into this statement. But how it serves you in the interview is really in establishing that theme of how you show up in your interview stories. So what is yours, right? And this is something you can come back to, of course. We don't have time necessarily to go through it now, but start to build this out for yourself. Start to tell this story. Okay. So second part of a good story is the plot, of course. And if we think back to the star format, a lot of that's going to show up in the actions part, but we'll kind of go through the full cycle here. So this is the storytelling arc of the hero's journey. which is a classic sort of form of storytelling or a framework that's often used in storytelling. It captures and encapsulates a lot of sort of old and current stories and how they're told. So let's think about how this applies to interviews. But the first is, you start with that call or that quest. That's sort of the task in STAR. So what are you tasked with? What are you called to do? Whether it's you are identifying it as something you want to do, or you're responding to somebody sharing it that they want you to do it. So that's the first piece of a lot of kind of classic and current stories. Then you go through the course and trials. This is the phase of that actions that things maybe don't always go perfectly, but somehow you rebound from it. Or it's like everything's going great, you're making all the right decisions, but ultimately that's your course. Maybe there's not as many trials in your story, although I think trials are much more interesting. Just side note, it adds a little bit of drama to the story, which keeps the person on their toes a bit. And it tells an authentic story, because most of our experiences when we've gone through them have some element of trial. And then the final part is that insight and transformation. So this is the results. This is where you are having, a quantitative and qualitative impact. And then something about that experience really changed you fundamentally. So there's 5 key questions to help you flesh out these different components of a best practice story. For the call, why was this project important to the business? And so the situation can help create that experience or that foundation of why it's important, right? Here's the background. This is rooted in a strategic direction for the business, or we were having challenges with this particular thing, and I was called to do whatever it is that was important for the business. So ask yourself that question. Why was this project important? In the quest phase, how did you define the problem? This is really important, and a lot of clients don't emphasize this, but you want to make sure you contextualize that you were thoughtful and intentional about how you went into the solution. A lot of people just kind of drive towards the solution. This shows up a lot with case studies, by the way, which I do prep for. And people just kind of say, oh, I'm just going to give you the answer. But you want to frame it up in terms of the problem you're solving, so that you can then talk about how your solution neatly fit into the problem. And so then relatedly, what is the solution? On the course, what were your unique contributions to the plan? How did you shape the course? Was it windy? Was it straight? Did it have different people coming into it along the way? What were the actions you were taking that if you hadn't been a part of this story or this particular initiative, it would have gone differently? How did you differentiate it? And then for trials, like I said, I always recommend including trials. But what challenges did you face? This doesn't have to be everything went wrong, the whole project was steered off course. It could be more like somebody disagreed with you, or there was a stakeholder that was maybe a little difficult to get a hold of. So anything that kind of came about during the course of the example that posed some sort of challenge. And I am going to guess, like I said earlier, that there's probably at least one trial in your story. So consider including it. It makes for a more interesting story. It's a best practice in storytelling. And then finally, that insight. So how did the project transform you? And I really want to encourage you to end on this versus just the quantitative and qualitative results. So we won't go through this fully, but these are the components of what I'd recommend you doing on your own for any given story, answering these questions in this way. It's a little bit of a different kind of take on the STAR format, and it might steer you more again towards some of this like differentiation of standing out in the interviews. All right, so we are going to go into more details on how it ends and what I recommend in terms of the shaping of this section. So I want to, again, remind you that you are the hero of the story. And we want to celebrate you. And this is the time for you to do this in the results section. So there's the business outcomes piece, which a lot of people understand and sort of innately gravitate towards giving the business outcomes. You know, did it improve process, decrease costs? Did it create something that would later down the line kind of have an impact on the business? Are there proxy measurements that you can look at for the things that you did that that show that it had a business outcome? Did you change a process, et cetera? So that's the business outcomes. Again, more straightforward. But the reputational outcomes, a lot of people leave out. So, you know, was there something about this experience that led to a promotion or potentially a just recognition by your organization in some way? You know, how did this impact what happened for you as a professional in the organization? And then I think the other piece here that is sort of loosely tied to reputational is, how did this change you? So what did the story do to improve everything afterwards? You know, an example here might be you were working on a product launch and you learned how to rally very diverse voices at the table from all different stakeholder groups through kind of understanding and empathizing with everybody at the table in a way that you hadn't before. Not that you were not that you lacked empathy before, but that it really kind of, you could see that as a marked change due to just this very complex project. Well, that is something you can end on. And when I look back, I see the power of empathy, and really moving forward, I've applied that to everything. How can I get to know everybody's perspective and be thoughtful about negotiating between them so that we can get to that conclusion? So then the final step here is putting this all together. You have your hero, you have your kind of full story arc, the best practice, the hero's journey, and then you have your results. So in putting it all together, we basically look at the different kind of story types that allow you to emphasize and amplify some of these components. On the hero side, the hero is going to show up in all regards, in all stories, of course, but it's going to show up most in your success story, which is one of the core stories I recommend that you write. So the greatest success in your career. And that's really an important one to have in your back pocket to be able to just lean into what you've done without them kind of defining exactly what it needs to look like. You basically own the full answer. So if they ask what's something you're particularly proud of or a success story, this allows you to kind of do all that reflection with the hero work that we went through and have it show up in that example. Tell me about you. I think that's pretty straightforward. Of course, you're the hero of your tell me about you. One of the things I recommend with tell me about you is to make sure it doesn't just sound like a resume dump, because they have your resume. They might not have read it, but they still have it. Hopefully they've read it, but you want to have more sort of themes in that particular question. So this is where the hero comes in. What are the 3 values, for example, that you align your career to, and how can you maybe show those values in your tell me about you? So again, if you're kind of a connection person, talking about all the elements of cross-functional like work that you've done in sort of a theme for your tell me about you. So that's a great space for you to lean into the hero. Weakness, previous feedback, that's more on obviously the flip side, but I also think this is where you, for greatest weakness, you can look at an older weakness that you've worked on, that you've grown with. And so the hero shows up in the growth. And then we have your management and leadership style. This is really for people who are going into management roles, but you get a lot of questions like, what is your philosophy for leadership? How do you lead teams? What would your direct reports say about you as a leader? And this is, again, the hero work can be really helpful for you to look at those themes and convey the fact that you are showing up as a really strong leader. And then career goals, why this role? Similarly, that hero work can really show up in a question like that. So then in the course, that maps to really anything that's kind of a full end-to-end experience or story. So it's like an execution question, a productivity question, an end-to-end story. So where you worked on something from beginning to end, which I highly recommend having as a key story. So I mentioned success. Failure is another one that you want to make sure that you have, and that's in the trials. End-to-end story is really important, where you ideally came up with a new initiative that you wanted to work on, or that you saw that was really important for the business, and then you executed on that through to launch, and maybe even beyond. You were able to show impact. And then bias towards action is a really common theme that shows up in these sorts of companies, the FANG companies. So what is an example where you didn't have all the data, you didn't have all the answers, but you were able to take that first step and move towards executing on a particular project? How do you deal with ambiguity? That's another key story that I recommend for clients. This is important because a lot of companies don't give explicit direction on how to do something. You have to figure that out. So ensuring that you're showing all the components of the best practice storytelling arc through those stories of ambiguity is really important. Where is the challenge? Where are the trials? And then within the trials piece, the stories that those map to most are the greatest failure, which is another key one, conflict, which is a definite key one that I recommend making or fleshing out. A cross-functional pushback, this would be less about conflict, more just kind of challenging circumstances with cross-functional teams. And then when you've influenced. And basically this list on the right is the core list that I ask my clients to develop in terms of stories. Basically having something that thematically maps to all of these. And that can actually net to just 5, like I said, or you could make one for each of these. But ultimately, these are the themes that are kind of the most important, and they directly map to the work that we went through and talked about with the hero, the course, and trials. So that is it. That's all the content I have today. I think we have a little bit of time I'm pretty sure, to answer questions. If not, I can stick around for a little bit, but thank you for joining and good luck with your storytelling.
Thank you, Meredith. That was indeed an insightful session. We have a couple of questions. Shall we proceed?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So the first is from Gayatri Anand. She asks, for Amazon Program Manager role, does this format work or should stick to typical star method?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I mentioned that all of this is sort of rooted in STAR, and it's just about amplifying certain components to make it a little bit more interesting and differentiating. So ultimately, like the hero is going to show up in a STAR format, the course is going to, and the trials and tribulations. It's just making sure that you lean into these additional components beyond STAR. Certainly Amazon is a little bit more focused on the STAR format itself. So I wouldn't want you to veer fully off of it, but more so just ensure that you're adding additional interesting components to that core framework.
Sure, perfect. I hope, Gayatri, that answers your question. So the second question is from RJ. He asks, how long should a story be?
Yeah, this is like a classic question. I always say with an annoying response, which is it depends. If you have an hour with somebody, it's going to be you're going to have a little bit more wiggle room with time than if you have 15 minutes, right? Some people meet with a recruiter for 15 minutes. But I would say best practice is somewhere between, if it's a really good story, somewhere between 2 to 3 minutes. And then you can take a little bit longer on your tell me about you, just because it's kind of the story of your life. But I wouldn't go past, 4, for example, on anything, any one thing, and really allow for space for questions. You want to share enough that you get your main points across, but also make it engaging in a different way, which is allowing for more of a conversation back and forth, which shows up through questions.
Yep. I hope that answers your question, RJ. Do we have more questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions people have.
All I can see in the chat.
Oh, RJ said it did answer. Good.
Thank you. Gayatri, Vikas, John, Baljinder, Alan, any questions you have?
No worries.
I think it's
I'm around if you need to chat me later. I'm around on Carrus, so you can send me a chat for sure.
Yeah, John has a question. Any book recommendation related for this topic?
I mean, I think the core star book from the Carrus founder is great. So I want to plug that. That's a really good one. It depends on the type of interview that you have, but if you're doing case study interviews, I like kind of Cracking the PM interviews, a really good one. In terms of the storytelling sort of framework I went through, I don't think there's necessarily one particular book that I'd suggest, but it is really just about moving through those steps with yourself or with a coach, and kind of giving yourself time. I think that's really important. A lot of people try to rush through, like, this happened, I know it. But if you actually take the time to flesh out all the different components and make sure you're thinking about those sort of interesting pieces that maybe you wouldn't think of in first blush, that's what's going to help you stand out. So no one book per se that aligns to the specifics that I went through, but I do think that star book is great, and Cracking the PM interview.
Perfect. I hope, John, and that answers the question. So we have a follow-up question from Gayatri Anand. For functional interviews, any tips for the preparation of functional interviews?
Yeah, I'd be curious to see which function you're referring to. I'll just go off of what I think it could be. If it's one of the more, standardized interview types, like case studies for product management, or, data science has case studies as well, or you're doing sort of a TPM role, you also have some case study type work. Then I do have, it's a totally different topic in a lot of ways, although there's some overlap. I do have a framework that I like to use, and I work with clients through that framework. But the key pieces there are just ensuring your context setting with that problem. Like I said, you're fully sharing kind of what you know about the problem at hand and the case that they're giving you, and laying that out beyond just what they shared, any context you have outside of that. And then from there, kind of going into what your solutions are, and then adding some critical feedback to your solution at the end is another key component. But you don't want to jump to the solution. And I'd say a majority of people that I work with, especially in the beginning, kind of start doing that because it's much more comfortable. We have fun ideas. We want to share them with people. And so I think that's the instinct. But my biggest recommendation is start with the problem, then go into solution, and then end with sort of a self-critique, showing that you're not somebody who's sort of stuck in their ways. You think about the fact that your idea might not be perfect, and there's these risks associated with it. Ending on that is almost the equivalent to this notion of lessons learned that I recommend going through in your behavioral stories. Program manager, non-tech. Okay. Yeah, I think it's the same, really. It's, going through the problem, establishing your awareness, solution, and then self-critique. But my framework is definitely more specific than that. And so if you wanted to work together, I'd be happy to walk through it and we can go through some examples. I usually with clients, I'll come up with like random examples that we can walk through together or do mocks with. And it can be really useful to partner with somebody on that because sometimes we can kind of get stuck in our own head.
Perfect. I hope, Gayatri, that answers your question. Perfect. Any more questions, guys? Also, for anyone who is attending Meredith's session for the first time, you can check out Meredith's profile. And here's the link. You will see a list of her great work, the reviews, and what she offers, each and everything, like what roles she will help you to crack, the coaching types and everything.
Yeah. I hope to hear from some of you. And in any case, I just wish you the best of luck.
Definitely. So this is one more question. For director and VP level interviews, what should we change in our stories?
Yeah, well, there's a little bit of a different prep. I mean, it's everything that I said. And for senior leader positions, I would say you also want to really be able to tell your leadership story, be able to answer questions like, how do you build team culture? And what is your philosophy around hiring? And I'd say at a high level beyond that, right? Like, let's say the common questions I mentioned, the common stories, plus these leadership stories and leadership questions. The most important piece for somebody who's going for a leader role is to up level your answer. So try to get out of the tactics and into the wisdom that you have. I mean, you most likely have a career where you've learned a lot. And when you make a given decision, it's based off of those learnings. So when you're sharing your stories and your responses, really citing it as driven by your point of view, your wisdom, or best practices that you've read and you adhere to, instead of it just being kind of a step-by-step play of what happened. I even will encourage people who are going for those kinds of roles to start with the philosophy. So if the question is something like, how do you deal with challenging, peers or something like that? Like, well, when I encounter working with challenging peers, I always do A, B, and C. And then you can kind of go through the example itself, but you're starting at that higher level view, that strategic view, before kind of showing up in the weeds, right? Because as a leader, you want to always be able to see the bigger picture. Hope that answered your question. Of course. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, or are we all done? All right. I don't see any other questions. So thank you again for all your time today and attention. I again wish you all the best luck, and I'm here if you need a resource.